Chapter 15, exercise technique for free weights and machines. So within this chapter, we're just going to basically just briefly cover just the essentials to getting started with lifting. Okay, and that's just kind of we'll talk about the grips, where the feet need to be, some basic techniques such as making sure that, you're stable, proper position, breathing techniques, talk about when to breathe in, when to breathe out, versus the Valsalva maneuver, some general spotting techniques and tips and ideas. So, and here just not a lot in this chapter, but just kind of lays down some of the groundwork that then carries into once you actually start training and lifting and just the proper ideas and techniques for that. Chapter 15, exercise technique for free weight and machine training. This chapter, understand the general techniques involved in properly performing resistance training exercises, provide breathing guidelines, determine the appropriateness of wearing a weight belt, provide recommendations for spotting free weight exercises, and teach proper resistance training exercises and spotting techniques. So with hand grips, there's a couple different ways to grip the bar. One, pronated grip, and there's a picture on the next slide. I'll show all this. But here you got the palms are down and the knuckles are up, also called the overhand grip. You have the supinated grip. The palms are up, the knuckles are down. This is called the underhand grip. Neutral grip, so the knuckles point laterally, as in a handshake. Alternated grip, so use one hand on pronated and the other on supinated. And last, the hook grip. So similar to the pronated grip, except that the thumb is positioned under the index and middle fingers. So here's the pictures right here. You see A's are pronated. The palms are down, knuckles are up. B, supinated. Palms are up, knuckles are down. Alternated, you can see right hand is pronated, left hand supinated. And that could be vice versa, flipped as well. So it doesn't have to be first alternated just that way. It's just alternated, just where one's pronated, one's supinated. And D is the hook grip. Now this is a posterior view. And when you do the hook grip, you see right there the thumb is locked underneath the index and maybe the middle finger. That's always going to be done in a pronated grip. Okay, this is just supinated, this is just a posterior view, just so you can see what it looks like. Now, the hook grip is generally used during Olympic weightlifting because it allows the bar to be really tightened up in the hands and gives you a better grip than just doing without the hook grip itself. Okay, and then it says when the thumb does not wrap around the bar, the grip is called an open or false grip. So make sure this is not the hook grip now. This is the pronated, supinated, alternated grip. You can see on A, B, and C, all those grips, the thumb is wrapped around the bar. Make sure when you're doing barbell exercises and dumbbell that the thumb is completely wrapped around the bar itself. Never leave the thumb not wrapped around. So if the thumb is not wrapped around the bar, that's called an open or called a false grip, and that's dangerous. So make sure when you're doing barbell exercises, the thumb's always wrapped around the bar because it gives you the best grip and keeps you safe. And the hook grip, like I said, the last one's generally done only during Olympic lifts. So your cleans, your snatches, clean pulls, snatch pulls, deadlifts, some extent, which is not Olympic lift, but you could use it during that as well. Here's the grip widths. So you can see in the barbell right there that those X's are on the bar, the checker pattern right there. That's called the knurling. That's the rough part of the bar. There's where you get that grip. And the most common is going to be, generally within a thumb's length away from the edge of the knurling, right in the middle. Okay. Now, wide grip out further, that would be something doing like the snatch. You'd have that wider grip. And then there's also the narrow grip in real close, where your hands are basically at the very end of the knurling in the center right there. But most common is going to be kind of in the middle. Some are, thumb's length away from the middle of the knurling right there. towards the middle of the knurling generally is where the grip's going to be. Says a stable position enables the athlete to maintain proper body alignment during an exercise, which in turn places an appropriate stress on the muscle and joints. So make sure doing free weight, machines, anything, the body is as stable as possible. Okay, taking a deep breath in, keeping the core nice and tight. That'll keep the body stable at all points. Okay, and so that's why when you're lifting, I always say when I'm coaching, act like there's a string from your belly button to your spinal cord. And I'm standing behind you pulling that string backwards. That's going to be pulling that belly button to the spinal cord. So that's going to keep it nice and tight. Keeping especially the core tight, because if not, there's where you get a lot of injuries, especially lower back injuries. So keep, like I say, take a deep breath in. That'll keep the core tight, chest out. That'll keep everything nice and proper position to allow for the proper moving of the proper executing of the activity. For anything doing supine or seated, that is laying down or sitting down, I should say, you have the 5 points. So 1, head is against the bench or some kind of back pad. 2, shoulders and upper back are placed firmly and evenly on the bench. 3, buttocks are placed evenly on the bench. 4, right foot flat on the floor. And 5, left foot is flat on the floor. So make sure if you're doing anything seated or standing or supine, that your head, your shoulders and upper back, your buttocks, right and left foot are all firmly plated on something stable. So if you're bench pressing, your head, shoulders, and buttocks are all going to be on the bench. Never lift those up. And then your feet are firmly placed on the floor. Okay, so those are your 5 points of contact. It says exercise performed while standing typically require that the feet be positioned slightly wider than hip width, with the heels and balls of the feet in contact with the floor. So usually that hip to shoulder width is kind of the position where your feet are going to be in for a lot of different movements. Okay, but usually a little bit wider than hips. Hip width just a little bit wider is usually a generally good starting position for movements. And then from there you could adjust as you progress and get more trained and more experienced. So range of motion speed, like we've learned about already, but full range of motion maximizes the value of an exercise and improves or maintains flexibility. So make sure you're always going through the full range of movement. Make sure you have a slow, controlled movement to increase the likelihood that the full range of motion can be reached, though quick movements are appropriate for power exercises. Okay, but make sure when you're doing a movement, it's slow and controlled, going through the full range of motion, and that will maximize and increase the value and give the greatest benefits possible from doing the movements. Breathing considerations. So it says the sticking point is the most strenuous movement of a repetition. So that's like coming out of the squat, or as soon as you bench press, you're going down, touch the chest, and then you're going up. That initial part, that's the sticking point. So this occurs soon after the transition from the eccentric phase to the concentric phase. So we instruct, exhale through the sticking point, and then you inhale during the less stressful phase of the repetition. So if I'm going to squat, I'll inhale, essentially as I'm kind of going down in the movement, and I'm going to exhale going up through that sticking point. However, for experienced lifters, and really I teach this for pretty much all lifters, in all honesty, they sometimes don't recommend this, but I think it's valuable. You start teaching people to do the movement, and part of doing that movement is learning how to breathe. And so we go with the Valsalva maneuver. So with the Valsalva maneuver, they say for experienced and well-resistance trained athletes, but I think you should teach everyone this, start teaching them how to do the movement as soon as possible. And this is where you take a deep breath in and you hold that breath as you're going down, because if you're doing heavy squats, you need to stay tight as you're eccentrically lowering the body. So take a deep breath in, and then you start to eccentrically lower the body. And then as soon as you hit that sticking point, come up out of the squat, there's where you let the air out. So the Valsalva maneuver is essential for a lot of different exercises because it keeps the chest cavity nice and tight. It equalizes pressure from the outside of the vessels along with the inside of the vessels. Okay, and it keeps, like it says, a neutral spine, erect upper torso. It allows for, they keep that body in a nice, proper alignment to allow you to do the movement, especially if you're squatting, deadlifting, benching. All these things are heavy. You want to stay tight during those entire movements. Okay, the problem is that athletes forget to breathe. Once they've let the air out, going through the sticking point, they forget to breathe for the next rep. There's where it becomes dangerous. Okay, but nonetheless, I think they say for experienced well resistance training, I believe you should start teaching the Valsalva maneuver and how to do it properly from the very beginning. Start teaching how to execute the breathing along with the training. Okay, so with that, take a deep breath in as you're eccentrically going through the motion, and then as soon as you hit the concentric, you start to let the air out. And once you get done with that movement, with that rep, take another breath in, stay tight, go through the exercise again. Okay, let's go through all that. We already talked about that. Weight belts. They should be worn only when you're reaching the, see that second point right there, near maximal or maximal loads. Okay, so exercising does put a lot of stress on the lower back. And so weight belts help stay tight, and they help to keep the core and everything nice and tight through heavy lifting. So that's why weight belts should only be worn during near maximal or maximal loads. Okay, if training is a good way to help strengthen up the core, squats, deadlifts, all that strengthens up the core because you're dealing with instability. You're working against gravity through a movement. And so you want to have that natural weight belt, that is your core, get strengthened up along with anything else. Okay, those who have big squats and big benches, big deadlifts, big cleans, big jerks, big snatches, all that lift a lot of heavy weight, all have really strong cores. And none of them wear weight belts until they're getting to near maximal loads. So with that being said, weight belts should only be worn when you're getting close to near maximum. Other than that, you don't need them. Okay, you need to naturally get strong, allow your natural weight belt to be strong as much as possible, and to the point where you have to use one. It says it's not needed for exercises that do not stress the lower back or do not stress the lower back but involve light loads. Okay, so if you're working 8 sets, 4 sets of 8 on back squat, you don't need a weight belt. Okay, you don't need a weight belt if you're doing a heavy triple or a heavy single or double for squats. Okay. It says type of exercise to perform and the equipment involved. So spotters are typically required for free weight exercise performed with a bar moving over the head, a bar position on the back, a bar racked on the front of the shoulders, a bar passing over the face. You do not need a spotter for power exercises, so such as the clean and jerk or the snatches. You don't need one because it actually becomes less safe for the lifter and the spotter doing those type of movements. Okay, so like you'll need a spotter for bench press is good. For squats, front and back squats, deadlifts, overhead press, those are things you can use a spotter for. But the cleans, the jerks, snatches, never use a spotter because it's like I said, it's less safe for the athlete and the spotter by using that. Because if an athlete can't make the movement or perform the lift, they could just dump the weight because you're using bumper plates. Just let go of the bar in the proper way. That's the safest way to let go of the weight. It says overhead exercises and those with the bar in the back or front shoulders. They should be performed inside a power rack with the crossbar in place in appropriate height. So out of the rack exercises, so 4-step lunge or step up with heavy weights can result in serious injury. These exercises should be only executed by well-trained and skilled athletes and spotted by experienced professionals. And over-the-face exercises. So the spotter must grasp the bar with an alternate grip, usually narrower than the athlete's grip. So like bench press, for instance. If someone's benching, especially using heavy weight, the spotter would do an alternated grip in between the lifter's hands. That way it gives them the greatest amount of force to be able to help get the bar away from the lifter. So here's the example, spotting free weights with dumbbells. So B, the one on the, is the correct way of how to spot with dumbbells. You see, because the spotter's grabbing the athlete's wrist. Okay, if you do the elbows, there's a potential that the dumbbell could then fall onto the athlete and hurt them. Now, if you have experienced lifters, experienced spotters, sometimes they like the elbows. So I'm not going to sit there and say that's the only way to spot. I'm just, for us and for our learning purposes, for learning this profession, learning this trade, learn the spot from their wrist. Okay, once you become experienced and trained and you have an experienced trained lifter, they could tell you how they want to be spotted. But as of right now, it is spotting with dumbbells at the wrist. You got number of spotters. So that's determined by load, experience, ability of an athlete, and spotter and physical strength of spotters. So sometimes with heavy squats, you might have 3 spotters. One on each end of the barbell and one behind the lifter. It says communication between athlete and spotter. Use of a liftoff, how many reps, and timing spotting assistance. So with lifting, we know that it's a skill. You got to learn how to lift. Spotting is the same thing as well. It takes time to learn how to spot. So make sure that there's a communication between lifter and the spotters, proper communication. That way everyone stays safe. So within this chapter, we just saw that, learning how to lift, some of the main things to be concerned about as well. Where's grip? Okay, what movement you're doing, what kind of grip should you have? Barbell versus dumbbell. Where should the feet be? Remember, about hip to shoulder width apart, depending on what movement you're doing and how experienced you are. Keeping the body nice and tight and stable, going through the full range of motion. That'll increase the value of the lift and keep you safe and not injured. Breathing, always recommend to inhale during the less stressful part of the movement, exhale during the most difficult part of the movement, usually through the sticking point. Sticking points where you're switching from eccentric to concentric. But I believe the Valsalva maneuver is essential for lifting. It should be taught properly from the very beginning. That's where you take a deep breath in, keeping everything, the abdomen, chest, nice and tight as you're going through the less stressful part, through the eccentric part, because it keeps you, especially when you're squatting, holding that breath in while you're descending down will keep everything nice in proper alignment. And then as you switch through the concentric, going through then the sticking point, then you start to let the air out. Okay, through the movement. Once you get done, make sure you take another breath in and go through it again. Because what most people do is they forget to breathe between each rep. Okay, so with that, weight belts should only be worn during when you're getting to near maximal loads. Other than that, allow your natural weight belt, that is your core, your abdomen, all the way through your lower back, to really support you and get strengthened up along with everything else. Spotters, only use spotters who are experienced, and that's going to be dependent upon how many spotters you use will be dependent on kind of what you're doing. Okay, if you're doing heavy squats, heavy bench press, you could have 3 spotters, one on each end of the bar and one in the middle. If you're doing anything over the face, make sure spotters that they do is alternate grip and the hands placed in between the lifter's hands. Good communication between spotter and lifter. Like, all right, 1, 2, 3, let's go. How many reps are doing, and kind of when to take the weight and help out so the athlete doesn't get injured. So spotters need to be trained just as much as lifters do in a lot of ways. Okay, so those are kind of just the basics for exercise techniques, free weights or machines, and just know those basics, and it'll help launch then into the more advanced parts of training and actually getting into coaching and lift and teaching technique, because it's important to keep the athlete safe and yourself safe as well. So you want to make sure to keep both safe at the same time. That's why during power exercises, you don't use a spotter. And if you're doing a clean or snatch or jerk, you can just dump the bar, and that's the safest way for the lifter to get away from the bar, just for them to drop it themselves. Okay, so it's always about safety. It's always about keeping everyone safe and healthy and injury-free and getting the most out of your movements, getting the most out of your exercises.